Hi, I'm Arthur, and one of the things we tend to forget about this lovely thing we call a hobby, and for some a lifestyle, is that the lore and the fluff comes secondary and is supposed to supplement the game, not the other way around. I find it is becoming a bit more increasingly common for me to interact with individuals who play Warhammer the game, as in the tabletop war game, the same way someone would play a card game. They see the cards, they see the stat lines, and they pick up the miniatures or the cards accordingly, building their list without understanding the greater background behind them and the weight of literature. Now, do I think that is the incorrect way to play? No, I do not. It's very much not the way I play things, but that's besides the point. To get on track, for those who don't play the game, every so often James Workshop comes down from on high atop his glorious mountain to grace us with a new rule set. This is an update to the rules to tweak them and usually wipe the slate clean to keep it fresh and fun for everyone. Sometimes the jump between editions is massive, like the jump from 7th to 8th, causing the entire range of rules to be changed to a completely different set. How that works is in each edition a new codex is usually printed with updated rules, but it's not necessarily needed for some editions, as they usually have the same baseline. But for 7th to 8th, the 7th edition rules did not work at all in 8th, so they've released these things called indexes. These indexes are a collection of all the factions' rules, so you could play while waiting for your entire army to get the rulebook known as a codex. That's one of the major updates that you could possibly see, but on the other side of things, the jump between editions can be a bit more minor, like with the jump between 8th to 9th, where all of the codex from 8th edition were usable in 9th, and everything was just kind of rule tweaks as well as just tightening the screws a bit for the new rules. Throughout the history of the editions, there has always been controversy, and I will not deny it. And for those of you who think I'm beating around the bush, I am. But not without reason. I want to give you the background of my opinion on 10th edition, which is the current edition, as much as I can before I actually get into it, so you can understand why I'm justifying what I'm saying. So, controversies in the past have existed, like I was saying. Like in 9th edition, the major complaint was GW was putting high-powered rules in $40 to $50 books that people would have to pay for if they wanted to stay competitive with their army, because they did like to market towards the competitive sides of things. For example, to play at a tournament, you need a rule book, which in past editions has been a bit expensive. I know here in good old Canada, the 8th edition rule book was roughly $90, which is painful, and it's been similar every edition after, but then you need a codex, which will run you about $50, and if you're running a special sub-faction, you need the codex supplement for that faction. So say you're running Imperial Fists, you need Space Marine Codex, and then the Imperial Fist Codex supplement, which usually runs you an additional $40, and if you are going to be running a secondary specialist attachment, you would need the book that specialist attachment comes in just to attend the tournament, which can run you between $40 to $60 depending on what book it is. And sometimes these books were very important and large, so they could be even more expensive than that, because they often came with crusade rules and additional content for other factions. So generally speaking, you have to spend between $150 and $200 in 9th edition in order to just play your armies at a tournament, which is a bit of a gatekeeping kind of moment for tournament play. So I'm not going to say the 9th edition didn't have its faults. Towards the end of it, I did kind of see the creep set in, and let's not talk about how bad Codex creep was, which is a concept where for some reason, as GW releases codexes, each one ends up being stronger than the last one by a little bit, to the point where towards the end of 9th, dog, don't even get me fucking started. I like squats, but this shit was out of line. So yeah, knowing that, you can piece a few things together, and alongside that, I should say I have been playing since the middle of 7th edition. I played pretty consistently to the end of 8th edition, and then I ended up taking a break for the beginning of 9th. But towards the end of 9th edition, I was getting more into it. So then 10th edition comes out, and I have been playing one or two 2 games a week every week since the beginning of its release. Minor games with friends that are below 1,000 points, and a few more strenuous games every now and then to spice things up. I am not a competitive player in the slightest. Honestly, I think competitive play ruins the game for the majority of the people who aren't competitive, but I'll get into that in a separate video. So with all that in mind, every single sentiment I have expressed is my opinion, and if you think what I'm about to say to you will sway you in the slightest, then I understand. But remember, these are my subjective points based on my personal experience. Okay? Okay, so, I just gotta say, 10th edition fucking sucks! I fucking hate 10th edition, and it's the only edition I have ever played that I have a sizable amount of complaints about. I'm gonna try to break every single one of them down, and I'm going to try and oversimplify every single one of them into 3 categories just to make it easier. But if you want the easy way out, my thesis statement is simply: in the process of overcorrecting and trying to make the game as balanced and accessible as possible in one fell swoop, they made the game boring and lame. So there, that's the end point, but it's not as simple as that. Let's single things out. 3 small parts, let's go. Part 1! The gameplay is grey-washed! Grey-washing is a term I use where, in the process of cleaning and attempting to tighten the mechanics of a game, they wipe away every aspect of it that made it cool and colorful in the first place, thus leaving nothing but a pile of grey fucking mush behind. And that's kind of what happened here. All of the factions feel the same, or at least the ones I've played. For reference, I played 3 different factions of Space Marines. You got 1, 2, and 3. A Chaos Space Marine list, Slaaneshi by the way, Death Guard, my own custom faction by the way, and Leagues of Votann. So if there are other factions that have radically different mechanics, and I just ended up getting struck by lightning 4 times in a row, then whoopsie toopsie, I guess that's my fault. And I can sum up the majority of the high-level plays for these armies with fish for 6s or make it so that you can only roll 6s. And I have the creeping fucking suspicion that every other army is the same way. Lethal hits, devastating wounds, so on, so forth. It's all just the same mushy exploding 6s shit that every other faction has. And don't even get me started on what they did to the Death Guard. The Death Guard, since their inception, in the first edition, the Plague Marine model came out as a metal cast, has been fully about defense. They have had a feel no pain or damage mitigation in every edition so far, but for some reason in 10th, they're an offensive army now with similar stats to that of the Leagues of Votann. Toughness 5 to 6 for infantry units with an above average wound count, but no feel no pain or improved saves? Man, I could have been describing either one of those miniatures. That being said, for some reason, Plague Marines and every other weapon in the Codex got lethal hits on their weapons, which ruins the army's aesthetic in my eyes. I get it, it's disease and the spreading of corruption and corrosion, but they're more defensive than offensive. It speeds the army up when the army's supposed to be slow and plodding. Their entire shtick is the phrase disgustingly resilient, and now they're not. They're tough, but they're not as resilient as other factions. More armies need to play slowly. It's not always about ramping up how fast they need to play. I liked having the ability to hunker down and play it out, but that's the thing. GW wanted to make them balanced. With how the meta is, they can't really be defensive without breaking that. Everything kind of plays the same as my endpoint here, with various broken mechanics that you have to exploit to play competitively, and in all honesty, it ruins the fun for me. Part 2, freedom of choice is a fucking myth! I was genuinely happy to see them bring back the ability to attach characters to units. It made me excited to think they were going to tone down aura spam and just add in a lot of unit bonuses, but no, it just made the game a bit more bland. Characters are supposed to be heroic units that add something to the game, be it strategic benefits, a decent duelist, a walking death machine, or just open up combo potentials with units that you wouldn't think to mix them together. But they have limited what units a character can be attached to, so that shuts the door for absolutely every possible interesting combination you can come up with on your own, and limits it down to what GW says you can do. I'm not fucking around here, it's one of the bigger reasons I hate this edition. Asymmetrical units cannot exist anymore, and if they do, it's very rare. A good example of my issue is that take the Space Marine Apothecary. One of the things I loved doing last edition was having a Primaris Apothecary be right next to a squad of melee Terminators and just doom walk my way up the board, soak up the hits and what. The Apothecary buffs survivability, and the Terminators are pretty survivable as it is. Now they all have to be dressed in the same outfit in order to be a part of the same unit, which, to be honest, kills other units' potential for being fun. So I can't even have an Apothecary be attached to a Terminator unit unless it's an Apothecary Terminator, which doesn't exist for any other faction in the game aside from, I think, the Dark Angels. Another example, the Biologus Apothecary. They have a fun bonus where you get lethal hits if you attach it to a unit, which is always useful. And then if they kill something in melee, the unit that this model is attached to gets objective secured 9, which makes this unit incredibly good at holding objectives. Too bad the Biologus can only be attached to fucking ranged units with kinda bad melee. Aside from maybe the fucking aggressors, but they don't move fast enough to get into melee or come in unit sizes large enough to be a threat in melee. So the Biologus is kind of just not really fun to use because one of its primary abilities are just useless. Hell, the Biologus itself doesn't even have a melee weapon. Yeah, the lethal hits does help, and I suppose you can use that, but that's another problem that I have with the edition. It's like you are attaching characters to units, not because the character themselves is interesting. You're just paying a points tax so that you can give that specific unit one ability, which is lethal hits. Oh, are you willing to pay 65 points for lethal hits on your heavy intercessors? There you go. Put the Biologus in there. Part 3, Exploits. Man, I just want to play a silly game with miniatures and not have to worry about playing some random dude with Eldar and finding out that in one turn of shooting in melee he can wipe out over 80% of any 2,000 point army without anything I can do to stop it. Yeah, that's my biggest problem with 10th edition. Through the process of dulling down the mechanics and making them more easily digestible, they somehow made the factions have mechanics so bad that for the first couple months of the edition, they were considered unplayable in professional settings. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, man, that Eldar versus Eldar because no one else wanted to fucking show up meta was pretty fun for a few months, right? The problem with this is twofold. If you have someone who has a really good exploitable strategy and you don't, then generally speaking, you can't win. There are some dumb things I have pulled in the past just to prove a point about, winning in 10th edition that honestly, I feel dirty for doing. Like, I remember in a streamed game I did, which I stream, check out my Twitch. I used a teleport striking unit of Einar Hearthguard. They have a D6 grenade weapon that fires at a decent range. I attached a call to it, which gives them lethal hits. There are 10 in a unit, so 10d6, strength 4 lethal hits, and they also get 10 additional plasma shots that are strength 9, -3, 2 damage. Now, if you don't play the game, sorry, that didn't make any sense to you, but also, for those of you who don't know, that wiped out almost anything. I killed Gazgil Thraka with that, which I shouldn't be able to do, because there's no response to that. I just put my guys down on the board on my turn, and then shoot you to death, and you get no chance to respond. Now, alongside that, you could say, just pay attention to your spacing, but in casual games, I just don't. And again, that might be my own biases coming to creep in, but I just find exploitable strategies like that ruin the game for me because I have to worry about losing my entire army because I made one mistake in the first round. I like call and response, not scream as loud as I can so I can't hear you and then I end my turn. It's just not fun. And secondly, when you have exploitable strategies that give instant wealth, it makes it so that people assume that there is an objectively better choice because there is one when you have that exploit. Are you going to attach a call to your squad of Einar Hearthguard and give them lethal hits, which will fucking annihilate most armies in the shooting phase before you can charge in? Or would you give them an Einar champion, which lets them just re-roll charges and he hits 3 times in melee? It's unfortunate, but yeah, you're going to choose the call to attach it. And unfortunately, the Einar Hearth champion can't be attached to any other unit. I hate that. Now, I'm not a meta chaser, but I love the idea of building an army around a theme and having it work. It's just my favorite way to play the game. I like having so many different choices that I can actually piece things together myself and find my own specific way of playing the game. But when I'm discouraged by being fucking annihilated by random strats that are obviously overtuned, I get a wee bit miffed, if you couldn't tell. I have so many friends and peers that are kind of taking a break from Warhammer 40k 10th edition because it's bland, it's boring, and they're getting rid of a bunch of different characters. One of the funnest parts of the game. Oh, and by the way, they remove those characters so that they can offer them to you once in a while in their shop so you can have that kind of FOMO bullshit. If you want a good breakdown of why I and a lot of other people prefer older editions as to 10th and why this edition is bland as all fuck, Deadlifts for the Dark Gods made a really good, actually kind of long form video about why this edition is kind of bad and why older editions were a lot more fun. I'm gonna pin it in the comments as I genuinely think you should watch that video to understand why you are missing so many cooler mechanics. It's also just a fun watch. I do not like 10th edition. It's why I've started to paint and play more Age of Sigmar and even dust off my old Horus Heresy miniatures so I can finally paint all those Tartaros Terminators. Because the lack of mechanical depth in 10th and the lack of individual feel for each faction makes the game just not fun. And at the end of the day, that's all a game needs to be. I can play a single game and have a lot of fun with a friend, but after playing it so much, I just see the cracks in the foundation and realize why I don't like it. But as I've said at the beginning of this, that is my opinion. I've heard a lot of people talk about enjoying it, and it's all up to the individual itself. So if you like the game and you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. I understand. It's a game. Everybody's opinion is going to be different depending on the environment that they play in. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed and mad. Like I was kind of saying, what do you all think about 10th edition? I kind of want to see what the greater audience feels about the game. Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? It's got problems? Honestly, I think 10th edition has good bones. They just need more. They need better rules. Not just better rules, just more fun rules that are wacky and silly. It might just be bland because the codexes are kind of lame so far, but I want to know what you all think. So comment down below. Alongside that, remember to like and subscribe. Thanks to all my channel members for supporting me, and if you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thanks again for watching. I need a fucking Tylenol.